chemically, there is a slower process that can make a neuron fire than the speed at which you can record. So you can basically record everything. It is such a big difference that actually we have done some work at the lab with Professor Van Halle during my PhD, that you can use a person's brainwave patterns as a fingerprint. At the moment, I can say there is no system in the world that we can call artificial intelligence.
Welcome to the 28th episode of Apple Finch Pudding, your gateway into the world of science. Today's scientist is Arno Libert. He obtained his PhD in computational neuroscience at KU Leuven and is co-founder and CEO of MindSpeaker. His work focuses on the brain-computer interface with an emphasis on healthcare and communication. Welcome, Arno.
Thank you, Jeroen. I'm really excited and happy to be here.
We're also happy that you're here. My first question is always the same. Do you have a fun science fact for our listeners?
A fun science fact. Well, there is quite a bit of hype that has been created around the recent developments of the big companies, Neuralink and Synchron, that started their brain-computer interface implants with patients. They've recently, and then I mean for the week of recording, have released their brain-computer interface systems, where patients are able to now click or control a mouse with their brain. That is an exciting fact. I would like to share. Another interesting fact is that whilst they use implants for this, we can actually already do this without the use of implants. And I think that is currently in the field of brain-computer interface an exciting thing, because it shows that these technologies are finally reaching the users, the patients that need these systems are finally being helped by these systems rather than the technology being locked in the lab.
Wow, that's really cool, and something I definitely want to delve deeper into, but we might focus first on more general things like what is a brain-computer interface?
A brain-computer interface is essentially a system that allows a computer to be controlled with the brain, but without the requirement of any type of exterior movement or control. So if you would say that allows the if you would call it a system that allows the brain to control a computer, a keyboard would be a BCI as well. So the connection is made directly from the brain to the computer, and a connection is established, or control is established through the manipulation of the brain waves themselves. That is a brain-computer interface. And for this, you need basically three things: a brain, a computer that can be controlled, and an interface that allows for the translation of the brain to the command to a computer. That's what these systems are.
And so one of the main differences that you mentioned with normal computer interface is actually the physical touch. That would not be a brain-computer interface. That would be, it would be a brain-computer interface, but not in the way that you intended.
In essence, yes, it would be very similar, but the brain controls, of course, the whole body.
Mm-hmm.
So in essence, everything is a brain-computer interface, but then your interface is your muscles, your arms, your legs,
Mm-hmm.
the interface controlling the computer itself. So that's something you could call it that. I know there are companies that are calling, for instance, EMG neural systems as well. That's EMG is electromuscular measurements. So these are the muscle contraptions that are measured. So there are companies that use these muscle contraptions and call it a neural interface, because of course that signal is coming from the brain, and you can create predictive models to see how the brain would be controlling these limbs and using that to control a computer. But in the pure sense, the scientific sense, it's always, I think, accepted that the brain-computer interface, sometimes also called the brain-machine interface, is the direct connection from the brain to the computer itself, so without the need of any external console or control hardware.
You mentioned already, or you touched upon it already. So how does a brain-computer interface work? You mentioned something about brain waves.
Well, you have several types. I think the biggest distinction to first make is the invasive versus the non-invasive brain-computer interfaces. The invasive ones use some sort of implant, some sort of electronic device that is invasively inserted into the body. And this has positives and negatives. The positives for the invasive systems is that their data quality is very high. It's very nice. So that makes the machine learning afterwards and the control more robust, more consistent, and easier to learn for the person themselves. But the negative is, of course, the implants part, the risk of infection that comes with any implant, anything being inserted into the body can have negative effects on the body itself, that an infection might attack these systems or the neurons might die and then your system becomes unusable. So there is the other side, the non-invasive systems, and these have several different measure methods. I know more about the non-invasive systems than the invasive ones. I'm going to admit this freely. So the non-invasive systems you can do with essentially fMRI, people know, but it's a bit unpractical. But there have been very nice reports and works done with the fMRI data. You can get a lot of information about a person out of those pictures. But when it comes to actual brain-computer interfaces, you need some sort of timing resolution. You need some sort of response to an action. So in that sense, what people typically start using is either EEG, electroencephalography, or FNIS, which is actually the measurement of the blood flow through the brain as a response to an action or a stimulus. The brain-computer interfaces themselves, they rely on one of these systems to gather the brain data. And once that brain data is collected, there's of course the usual cleaning and filtering of data. That's in all stories the same, but then it becomes a machine learning story usually, in that there is a machine learning system that has learned to translate those brainwaves or pictures or what you are using to control, to translate those into the command for the computer, and the computer then performs an action, which is put in by a programmer saying, okay, when this wave pops up, that the turn wheelchair right, for instance. That's kind of the essence of how these brain computer interfaces work. There is always, or typically, like very usual, I can't say always, a machine learning algorithm that translates the brain waves or the brain control into something that the computer can actually understand.
Before we delve more into the non-invasive part, when you talked about the invasive brain-computer interface, how do I imagine that? Is it like a small brain or chip that they plant into your brain, or is it something completely different?
In that sense, I think there are many companies that are working on implants at the moment. I think I'm going to mention two quite well-known ones, two that are also very far along and they're currently in their human testing stages. So you have Neuralink, which probably everyone knows from Elon Musk, which has a chip. And that is the idea there, is that they build a robot that can insert a chip into the brain, and that chip can read out the information that it's required, send it to the computer, and the computer controls it. So that is a chip that is inserted directly into or onto the brain. I'm not actually 100% sure where they insert it. I think it's, the last time I checked, it was wires that are inserted on top of the brain and then are connected together with one implant spot, and that sends the data to the computer itself. The second one is Synchron, which actually uses stent technology to put a wire into the blood flow of the brain itself and measures from inside the blood flow. That has, I think, a caveat that, or a positive, that it's a lot less, there's a lot less risk to infection here because you're not putting something that doesn't belong there. But as a negative, the data quality might be a bit lesser than putting the electrodes directly onto the neurons themselves. So there are, as I said, many companies working on neural probes, like EMEC is a famous one. on neural probes on things for psychological and diagnosis and curing of depression. There are lots of companies working on neural implants at the moment. And I think most of them have gone with chips, as in not necessarily to read or perform any action or do the calculations, but to collect the data and send the data to a nearby computation point where the data can be, well, again, like a brain-computer interface changed into its command or a control system.
Does the chip then also have like some kind of battery life?
Yes, but these are now, if you have a new phone, then there you have these magnetic charging systems, so they work kind of in the same way. They are charged not with a USB cable, but with just a remote patch. But yes, they typically do have a battery life.
Now we'll move to the non-invasive brain-computer interfaces. That's more your field. You mentioned stuff like fMRI, but if I understand correctly, the time resolution isn't high enough. So you use EEG. How does that work practically? Because I assume people are not constantly in an EEG machine, or are they?
In that sense, you to come back on the fMRI one, the fMRI functional magnetic resonance imaging is that if you've ever seen any medical any hospital show, it's that big tube where they push you in and it makes lots of noise. You're not allowed to have any metal in it. That actually takes a momentary cut of a part of your brain when it's called functional because at that point you are usually doing something, so the regions light up with what you are doing, corresponding to what you are doing. And then that is really a lot of interesting data because you get all the information of the whole brain at one point in time. So you can get a lot of information out of that. And there have been works where they have been able to determine education and age and gender and everything just from looking at one of these fMRI slices. So there is a huge amount of information there, but it is incredibly impractical because you need that tube to get that image, and that's not cheap. When it comes to EEG, that's actually the other side of the coin. That is relatively cheap. And you can basically record EEG anywhere within reason, of course. You can record it at home and you can wear it constantly because it's meant as a monitoring device. So the initial applications of EEG were sleep studies or the responses of epilepsy, for instance. And those require lots of data over a long period of time, whilst the person is in a controlled environment, such as the hospital. And from that data, they made the diagnoses. But they figured out that EEG, you have certain responses from the brain in according to actions you are performing and things you're trying to do. And if you can consistently control and repeat these responses, you can actually use them to control a computer. Because it's something you think like, I want to do this, and then the brain response becomes the control, essentially. That is the EEG has as its benefit that it's actually a very it measures electrical signals. In passive EEG, there's a difference between active, which means that's electrical. It's being actively amplified at the source, or it's passively amplified, or it's passively measured, which means it's the difference between 2 points. The difference is price. So what EEG that I always worked with actually measures is the difference between one point on the scalp to another point on the scalp. And that difference, that potential, can actually be translated into an action. So that electrical current or that electrical wave that comes in, these are the brain waves that I was talking about. These can then be used as a control function. And EEG has as its massive benefit that it has a very high temporal resolution. So you can have a sampling rate of 2000 hertz, for instance. And for the brain, that is huge because chemically there is a slower process that can make a neuron fire than the speed at which you can record. So you can basically record everything. But the problem is that since it is a measurement that is being done on the scalp, you get the sum of all the signals underneath it. So the whole brain you're recording, so you need multiple contact points usually in order to find your signal of interest. And of course, the skull is in the way. It makes everything a much noisier signal, and the spatial resolution as a result, as in trying to locate where the signal comes from, is a lot lower with EEG. That is the negative of EEG. So very fast, but very noisy data in essence. But when it comes to practicality, I'd say FNIS and EEG are the most likely components to become a non-invasive brain-computer interface because they are easy to do, relatively again, and very practical in use, as in you can do this at home. You don't need a big hospital room in order to control for the signals to be measured correctly.
And in terms of EEG, are we talking then about a helmet that people are wearing that's continually measuring? And also that continuous measurement, does it have some dangers with it?
It used to be like a cap, but that has changed in I want to say recent years, and then I mean in the past 10 years, a lot of companies have started developing these headsets, and they've realized that cap, that clinical cap, that looks like you're wearing a a swimming cap, I think it's called in English. They wanted to step away from that because that's what people see, and they already think like, am I supposed to wear that? So lots of companies have actually stepped away from that. They went to more slick designs, better designs, more design-oriented EEG systems. And even recently, they've come out, or companies have started providing in-ear EEG. So these are almost comparable to wearing earbuds, and it measures the difference between basically the earbuds, and that is then the brain signal that you can use for control. So we're getting to a point where you actually don't really notice how that a person is wearing the EEG, which is, in my opinion, what has been holding the technology back for a long time. That finally now there are designs coming out that people will want to wear and want to use. I know that Apple is also banking very much on this in-ear EEG system. They are filing patents. They're in development together with their Vision Pro. I think it was from Apple, their new system. So they are banking heavily on that in-ear EEG technology as well. And the continuous measurement of EEG is not stimulative. So it just measures the electrical difference. The only thing that it might get after hours of recording is uncomfortable because you have been wearing earbuds for hours, but it never stimulates. It doesn't shoot electrical current into the skin or the brain itself. That's not how it works. It is completely harmless. It's a monitoring system, not a stimulation system.
That's all already comforting. So these actually measure these potential differences which are based on the brain waves. But what are brain waves?
That is a question better answered by a biologist, but I'm going to do my best. And my apologies to any biologists that are listening if I screw this up horribly. I'm an electrical engineer by trade. So essentially you have neurons which communicate through synapses. Neurons that are close and related to each other, they make a bond, kind of. If two neurons react to the same thing, their connection gets stronger and they activate each other constantly, and that's called Hebbian learning. The more consistently they shoot together, let's say, that activation is shooting together, the more stronger that bond becomes. So that bond, one neuron firing is essentially a spike in activity, in electrical activity. If you have a bunch of neurons firing that together, you get an action potential. And that action potential, when it comes to EEG, is actually propagated to the skull base on the inside. And the electrical activity is actually spread out on the skull and propagated to the other side. And that is a potential that you can measure through something called pyramidal neurons, which accept all of this information coming from the neurons inside the brain and kind of spread it out on the inside of the scalp. And that is the potential that we actually measure. So it is an electrical signal of just activation of many neurons. And the more neurons fire at once, the stronger the response will be. And the closer to the inside of the skull, also the stronger the response will be. So we will not be able to like very accurately measure something that happens very deep in the brain, in the hippocampus, for instance. That will be difficult to measure, but if something happens in the ocular region and you're measuring at the ocular region, then the response is quite strong. And you can actually, the stronger the response, the more robust the brain-computer interface.
Let's assume now we have our raw data. You already mentioned that you use some kind of machine learning, but we have AI, machine learning, deep learning, that's all interused, which is not, but it's not always the same. It's not the same. Could you quickly explain, maybe, if possible, the difference and what you use exactly?
Well, we use machine learning, but I do have a degree in artificial intelligence, so I can explain you the difference. AI means artificial intelligence. In its essence, that means a computer that is able to understand the task that it is doing, like a human can understand the task that it's doing. It is literally artificial intelligence. It can do what a human can do, and it can learn this by itself. That is AI, and the pure form of AI would be a system that at the very least learns as well as a human does and performs the tasks as well as a human does, but is foreseen to do it better and learn it faster. That is what artificial intelligence is. It is often used interchangeably, but at the moment I can say there is no system in the world that we can call artificial intelligence. There are a lot of nice applications, but it is not pure artificial intelligence as it is defined to be. People are working on it though, so exciting stuff for the future. Machine learning is essentially algorithms that can determine patterns or rules that can allow for the regression or classification of instances. And that is maybe easier explained with an example. You can learn a machine learning algorithms to recognize a plane by showing it lots of pictures of a plane and showing it lots of pictures of what is not a plane. And you tell it this, like this is plane, this is plane, this is plane, this is not plane, and it learns what am I looking for, kind of. But not as a human would, but as a computer would, in ones and zeros, in the binary functions, in the features that it gets loaded into. It will look at that and see like, okay, these features together, that is plane. And that's what it conveys. That's how these image recognition systems work. These can also work unsupervised, which means you don't tell it, you just hope that it learns it eventually. And then deep learning is a form of machine learning where you actually use something called neural networks, which is based on the neural design and the neural buildup of the brain, the connection of the neurons, everything is learning together and can learn these patterns very well. They're very good at image recognition patterns, for instance. So it's essentially a system, they call it deep neural networks because it goes very deep. Essentially, there's a lot of layers, which makes it deep in order to learn. So there are lots of neurons learning in each layer, and each layer has its kind of own task. Maybe one layer has its task to recognize a line that is either right, straight, or a bit crooked. And then that passes on its information to the subsequent layers, and gradually it starts forming the image features and learning what corresponds to the image features. And that is deep learning. So when it comes to what we typically use machine learning systems because we have noticed that, especially with EEG, it is noisy data and it's inconsistent data because a person's brain is unique to them naturally, but that also means that the responses from one person to the next are not necessarily comparable. That makes everything a bit more difficult because I cannot use without transformation or mathematical theorems. I cannot take your data and reliably say that my data is going to be the same. So I cannot train a model based on your data, maybe I have hours of it, and use it for me because it might not work. There are ways to go around this, of course. That's also actually what my specialization during my PhD was. That's transfer learning, that you can make it kind of comparable. But to get back to the question, the machine learning that we use is linear or non-linear machine learning algorithms because they're more robust to noise and inconsistency. In my knowledge, these are still the system that works best, but people have been working on neural networks and not necessarily deep learning, but adaptations of deep learning to make the coding of brain signals more robust and more accurate. So there are people working with deep learning, but at the moment, I believe I can say that it's still the old machine learning linear methods that currently work the best.
It's already super interesting that you said that we know we are all a bit different, but that our brains are so different that we cannot translate data from one patient or person to another. So it is a really big difference then.
It is such a big difference that actually we have done some work at the lab of Professor Van Halle during my PhD that you can use a person's brainwave patterns as a fingerprint. You can use
Oh,
it to authenticate yourself. So like you have a password or a PIN code, getting a measurement of your brainwaves while you're performing an action is sufficient enough to, with an accuracy of I think 95%, determine that this is you and not anyone else. And this is consistent enough over time. So you can we did this with EEG at people's homes, so not in a lab setting. And they always had to do the same task over 5 different days. And we then used several days of this data to say, like, okay, this is this person, and on a new day, could that system detect, okay, this is the person. This person says he is me, Arno, and the brainwaves correspond to Arno. And otherwise, it says, yeah, you're not Arno. You're a different person. You're rejected or you're accepted. And that was a very accurate system. But then again, this is not like the full crypto like a security project that you need in order to get a security system in place. This was just a test to see how different these brainwaves actually are. You can say like we're all the same species, and that's true. But if you have a thicker skull than me, my signals are going to be bigger, like stronger than yours. That's already a start. If you have a lot of hair, that is also something that affects it. But also you have your personality, right? So we don't know where your personality is actually coming from, how that personality is actually encoded in the brain. That's something we don't know, but it is something unique to every person.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you can say that we are all the same species, but we're all our own person as well. And it is locked somewhere in the brain, in the chemicals of the connection between the neurons where that personality is encoded. And we, for now, don't know where. But what we do know is that it has, as a result, that there are a lot of inconsistencies between humans, and that is enough for us to say that your brain data is this and not another person's. But there are methods to like remove this personal part and actually get left with what is consistent amongst people. And that is actually more interesting from a machine learning point of view because you don't want that inconsistency. You want consistent data.
Let's assume we have, now we have the brain interface, we have the raw data, which are hugely unique to every person. What can we do with it? What is the use of brain-computer interface at this point?
Well, it was always sold, and this also comes a bit back to my company. Brain-computer interfaces was always sold as the solution to people who have locked-in syndrome. So that is one of the biggest use cases or biggest examples of that is Stephen Hawking, who suffered from ALS. There was cognitively nothing wrong with him. He was a genius, a brilliant man, but due to his disease, he was not able to communicate in a sufficient manner. So that these brain-computer interfaces are meant for people such as Professor Hawking to be able to communicate again at a natural communication speed. And this is then, if you remember, videos of Hawking, he used a robot voice, and the communication was actually very slow. What BCI designers, also MindSpeaker, is working towards is creating systems that allows a person to communicate again at the natural speed that a person talks, which is 100 words per minute typically. But this is a challenging thing. And so now, as I said, brain-computer interface is a machine learning problem. A machine learning problem is a data problem. So you need lots of data to get to a system like this. But at the moment, since we are just getting to a point where people are actually willing to wear the systems, we are just starting the data collection points. Some companies are further ahead than others. But as soon as you have the data to create a robust brain-computer interface, you have a lot of applications that are actually possible. But the first application is always meant to help people who are disabled or have difficulty communicating, to help them communicate again. That being said, as soon as you have a brain-computer interface that could control a television, you can use it you don't need a remote control anymore. You can just think next channel, or pause, or play, or speed up, accelerate, and the computer does it for you. So once these systems are in place, there is actually a very limitless amount of applications that they can do.
That actually also brings me to a paper you co-authored. I'm going to take it here. So the title was Predicting Premature Video Skipping and Viewer Interest from EEG Recordings.
No, that was my first publication.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, it's a very interesting one. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
That was a work that was essentially done to detect if we can determine if a person loses interest in their current task, and if we could then translate that loss of interest into a decision to skip the video they're watching. So if you want to put this into a real world setting, imagine you're just browsing on YouTube Shorts, and it automatically detects when you don't like the short and it goes to the next one, or TikTok or Instagram, something like that. That was the application that we were, research that we were doing here based on the brainwaves themselves. And it turned out that you can actually use passive monitoring systems. These are the carrier waves, the passive brainwaves that are present whilst you're doing something. These frequency bands that people often use in sleep analysis, that you can use these to determine when you're losing or gaining interest. And that you can say, okay, at this point, interest is too low, just go next. And that's kind of what that work was about, showing that it is possible to do it. And I think we reached 80% accuracy on it for the detection of interest, and 85 for the detection of skipping behavior. That means, okay, the person was sick of it and they clicked to the next video. We were able to predict that quite accurately.
Yeah, that's a high accuracy.
If you want, yes. If you want a usable system, I would say you need at least 99. Because imagine how annoying it is if you're watching something and it interests you and it just like, oh,
Yeah.
gone. That's if it happens once, you're already going to look as like, this thing. And if it happens twice, you're just never going to wear it again. So it is, from a scientific point of view, it is a high accuracy because it was something that hadn't really been done before. But from a practical point of view, it needs a bit more work. But that's, again, I would say a data problem. As soon as you get more data, the machine learning becomes stronger and you will get better results, or a more consistent, or more reportable results, I would say, statistically.
And the system is able to cope with the uniqueness of our brainwaves.
This system was trained for each individual specifically. So it was not meant for a population one. I don't think we ever explored that But again, if a system like this was ever to work, it would need to work for everyone, essentially. You want to put it on, you don't want to train, you don't want to then watch 10 videos to determine how interested you are. That's not practical. So that is something that would need to be solved first.
And imagine you're watching a boring video, but for some reason you want to watch a boring video. Is that something like in the future that you would be able to say like, it's okay, I want to keep watching even though it's not really that interesting if you're like zoning out and just need some
Oh,
background noise or something or whatever?
yeah, that's a good question. In essence, I would say if you're watching a boring video because you want to watch a boring video, you're still interested in the video.
Good point.
Background noise, that is a different one because I know that people like just listening to stuff while they're falling asleep, for instance. That is an interesting question, and that is probably something that it wouldn't work with. It would say like, okay, they're not paying attention to the video. I'm just gonna show something else. But that would be a problem, yes. Systems like that, because it would start skipping to the next videos consistently, and you might get an initial shock where you're like looking at your computer, like, what happened now? I didn't. I was watching that, but there would need to be something in place to detect that because at the moment there was not.
You said once these systems are up to point that they work well, applications are almost limitless. So that's also including, for example, not telepathy, but like talking to people or not really?
Well, the holy grail of BCI, to call it that, is a system that can, when you think, speaks for you. And that is not mind reading that I mean, but you imagine speaking a sentence
Mm.
and the sentence is spoken for you. For a person that is paralyzed, that is the solution. There is
Yeah.
like there is never going to be anything better. Is essentially you lost the ability to move your mouth and create the words. The computer now creates it for you, but to you it's all the same. That is kind of seen as the holy grail when it comes to mind reading, as in internal thought. That might be possible. I can never say it can't be because I've seen the developments in the past years, and honestly, what is possible now 5 years ago was impossible. For instance, they've done this, what I just said, that detection of the performed speech, or the I want to speak but I can't signals. They've done this with invasive implants already. And now people are building towards system, including in my company, building towards systems that can actually do this with non-invasive technology. And this was, I think, if you asked the researchers 10 years ago, they would say no, it's never going to be possible. And now they say it's not impossible with non-invasive technology, but again, give me 5 years and we'll get there. For telepathy, you would need, I mean, if you were to wear earbuds and the computer speaks to the earbuds, that would be close. But in order to like directly have somebody speak into your brain, you would need to start stimulating the brain. And I don't think how I can't say it's impossible because I don't know how the systems work completely, but I would say that it is non-desirable. Imagine somebody being able to play music into your brain or play sound into your brain. I don't think people would want that. It's a bit too invasive. And imagine getting a Coca-Cola commercial streamed directly into your brain. Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
doesn't sound fun. But I can't speak for forever, of course. For now, I would say if you were to go with the implant part or the implant path, I think there's a lot of things that are possible, but also a lot of things that are not very desirable. So with non-invasive, I would say no. With invasive, who knows?
But like communicating through earpods without actually talking, that would be more or
Oh
less
yeah,
feasible.
yeah.
Yeah.
That would be with an implant feasible now.
Okay.
With non-invasive, we're actually getting close. because to mindlessly plug my own company here, if I'm allowed to do that, we have created a patented technique that allows a person or allows us to, from EEG, actually detect that invasive signal from non-invasive signals. So we're able to approximate this. So that signal that is been used to establish this communication that a person can think or imagine speaking and speak, we can approximate this with the non-invasive systems. And we're currently building the application to actually allow people to do this. So that the patient or the people who suffer from dysarthria or speech paralysis can actually have a decent way to communicate again. For them, well, for that, we are getting close to a system where you can just imagine speaking and the computer speaks for you. So I would say that that is not that far off anymore.
And that's one of the core, or that's the core business of MindSpeaker. You're trying to give people a voice who are not able to talk anymore.
Yes, that is our starting niche. Is there's a high demand in this in these patient groups for solution that help them communicate robustly. So we are trying to offer them a solution, but we do have the ambition to grow this company beyond that patient niche and to go for the writing an email with your mind, putting on the TV with your mind kind of systems. That's all in the cards. But first, we need to be able to work the systems out, and with that, we actually have a very willing group of people that want to help with building these systems in the dysarthria patients that have been looking and have been overlooked with a solution for decades now. There are a lot of people that have been looking for a long time for a solution, and we want to offer them a finally a solution that they can not only help create, but is able to be made just for them so that they can speak like they want to and as they intend to.
And is there something else you can tell us more about MindSpeaker?
At the moment, we actually have our first plug and play brain computer interface ready for people to start using, but that uses a mind click system. So that is the mouse is being controlled by the brain directly. So we actually have a system where, together with software for communication, where a person can use, for instance, an eye tracker to move the mouse around, but the click, the intention to communicate is wholly done by the brain. So you imagine clicking or you perform an action that you chose as a click, and the computer clicks for you, and you can go through the software and communicate, make sentences. There's of course different systems of AI linked to this because we are able to implement these. So the AI, it corrects the grammar, it corrects the sentences, it fills in the sentences if there's missing information. And then you can speak it, and using actually cloning technology, we can actually give you your lost voice back. If you have a video recording or an audio recording of a minute, we can restore the voice that you lost and let you speak with that voice again if you have 1 minute of audio data available. So we use that technology as well, and that's one that is very popular with the users and the patients themselves.
That's insane. Because like you said before, when you think about Stephen Hawking, it was a really artificial voice, but now you can give people their own voice back.
The funny thing, yes, the funny thing, and that's something that is also a nice science fact number 2 for the middle or at the end of the podcast. I'm not sure how far we are. Is that Stephen Hawking actually got offered other voices, but that voice that he originally got was his friend's. It was made by his friend who had died of, I think, cancer, and he used that voice until the end of his life as kind of, okay, I don't need any other voice than the voice that my friend made for me.
That's kind of beautiful, actually.
Yeah. But this is something that I read on the internet. I'm not sure how true it is because,
Yeah.
okay, source
Yeah.
question mark, but yeah.
I hope it's correct because it's really beautiful.
Yeah, it would be nice if it was correct, but I'm sure that everyone is now Googling and seeing like, oh, this guy is full of shit.
Were you actually able to work with him as well, or not really?
He did visit the lab, but that was several years before I started, so I was not able to work with him, unfortunately. I was never able to meet him.
That's unfortunate. And for you personally, what got you into this line of work?
I actually, in 2016, when I was finishing my first master's degree in electrical engineering, my grandfather died of ALS. And towards the end, there is essentially very little support. And the manner of communicating that you establish is honestly inhuman, and it stuck with me. And I went into a Master of Artificial Intelligence afterwards, and that's how I got into the computational neuroscience through my thesis. After my thesis, I did a PhD, and after my PhD, I started at MindSpeaker. But I honestly hope that nobody ever here has the experience of having to communicate, or not, like having a loved one not being able to communicate with them, or God forbid, that situation themselves. It is you can imagine it as a way, as in you enter a room and they make known they want to communicate something. If they don't have a computer or don't have a solution, then you have to go down the list. It's like, are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Are you that you have to go to the bathroom? Are you not lying comfortably? And you can only say yes and no through a very high effort communication system. So this can be one grunt for yes, two grunts for no, for instance, or something like that. And that is no way to communicate, and definitely not a way to communicate if you're at the end of your life where you need to say goodbye to everyone. That's something that really needed to change, in my opinion. So as a result, the whole trajectory to offer to patients a way to naturally communicate again, no matter what their condition are. So that's how I got into this line of work.
I'm so sorry to hear that, but it's beautiful how you channeled it into actually a productive career and something that you're creating to help a lot of people. So thank you for that.
No, thank you as well. But yeah, it's a tragic story, but let's hope it has a good outcome.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Like MindSpeaker is going places. Your project that you mentioned, is it now available or it's now like in the first trials or?
It is available as a communication device. It is still we are consistently building on our system, making sure that whoever uses it actually gets a say into what it becomes. And we are now also in very close contact with logopedists and ergotherapists to make sure that what is missing is added. So we are in a later stages of feedback, but at the moment the system is available. And that comes with actually a personal system that we've implemented, that if a person has difficulty controlling, so the software is wholly controllable basically from things like keyboard, because if a person can, this can happen, a person cannot speak, but they can run and type. There are lots of children that actually have a condition like this. They can use a software with a keyboard or a tablet or a mouse or touch, whatever they like. And we have different stages of solutions for people who have difficulty performing certain actions. And this goes from the keyboard and mouse all the way until the brain control. When it becomes really difficult, we want to offer a solution to everyone in order to communicate. And this system is currently available for people to get. It is ready in English, German, Dutch, and French, because we're a Belgian company and Belgium is complicated. In these four languages, it's currently ready for use.
What are some of the major breakthroughs you foresee in the near future? Like, what are the next steps?
The next steps is going to be two things. Well, we are now getting towards more and more systems coming out that look better. The next step, I think there's going to be two small ones and one great one. Two small ones is a way to, as I said, create or transfer these brainwaves from one person to another and use trained systems for a population that work instantly to make these systems plug and play. So whatever the BCI is, it's something that is ready, can be downloaded from the internet, your machine learning model, downloaded from the internet, and instantly you turn it on and it works. That's going to be a small breakthrough that is going to happen soon, I imagine. The second one is the non-invasive way to decode essentially basic words and commands. That's going to be a second one. I know this is going to be a breakthrough because we're quite close to this ourselves. So this is a very promising thing that will happen, I think, relatively soon. And the third, the major breakthrough that's going to happen is there's going to be enough brain data to use, I think they're called generative adversarial networks, GANs, to start creating brain data and training a system on the brain data it created. So then you get a feedback loop that becomes independent of humans, and it just makes an AI that is perfect or building itself. That is what you need a lot of data for that. That is what everyone wants to build towards. That system that learns itself. That is going to be a major breakthrough if that comes out, because then you suddenly don't need to recruit the humans anymore. You don't need to do the EEG sessions anymore. You can create the BCIs at your computer at home. That's going to be a major breakthrough in applications when that happens.
The system is creating its own artificial brainwaves.
Yes.
And how do we know those are correct?
Because the system that makes the brainwaves is built using brainwaves. It has
Okay.
been thought to mimic brainwaves, but you need a lot of brainwaves for that because there is so much information in there that you might lose the stuff. But if you think about the advancements in large language models such as ChatGPT, something everyone knows, that is actually linked to these general adversarial networks because they didn't need the people's input anymore. They could just say, okay, this one is talking, you are going to be responding, and they just work in a loop and make each other better. So that's how you get to these very quickly evolving, like high performance systems all of a sudden. It's because this technology has been out there, but you need the data, and that is, again, the BCI story is a data story. Machine learning requires brain data.
But that's still machine learning. That's not AI.
Yes, that is still that is still machine learning. It would be getting closer to AI because now you have a system that's actually teaching itself. But as we also have seen, it heavily depends on the data. And these systems, in all of their power, what they can do, they fundamentally do not understand what they are trying to learn. And that is something that is often forgotten, is that if you have, to go back to my allegory with detecting planes, the system is very accurately at finding your plane, but it doesn't know what a plane is. And that is the key difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Yeah, there's also this classic example of machine learning where they try to identify dogs from, was it wolves, I think? And it worked perfectly. But afterwards, they found out that the machine was actually just identifying if there's snow, it's a wolf. And it wasn't looking at the organism.
I know of some of these examples as well. They're called clever Hans techniques in the machine learning world. It's the machine learning system just finding something that is so obvious that people just don't notice because it's there. I know that there was a similar system that they used to detect landing and planes that were on the tarmac and planes that just landed. Can they detect from the images what is what? And they had a system that worked 100% accurately. They couldn't believe it because it's a difficult problem. Turns out that if a plane lands, there's a photo being taken and there's a timestamp in the bottom right corner because it's a video. It's like it being filmed, so it's a timestamp with the frame. And if you take a picture on the tarmac, there's no timestamp, and it's just like, oh yes, it's perfect. Just only this part. They looked at the weights and what the decision making weights are, and it was just the bottom right corner. The rest was completely ignored. Just bottom right corner. Is there something there? Yes, then it's landing or taking off. If there's nothing there, now it's on the tarmac. So these are the clever Hans techniques that come back in machine learning quite often. You always have to be aware of those when you're in the research field. Because if you ever read or find a system that works with 99% accuracy, you need to start being suspicious because you might be doing something wrong.
Before we close, do you have a take-home message for our listeners?
I actually do, in that in recent years, there have been so many developments in neurotechnology that if you have a problem or you know somebody that has a problem, do some limited online research work and look around for solutions, because there are so many things that are possible now that were not possible 3 years ago, and even more that weren't possible 5 years ago. And there might be a solution out there, but you simply might not know it yet. So keep Googling, keep researching, keep looking for stuff. If you have a problem, there might be a solution out there. You just need to find it. And that can be a daunting task, but there are typically people out there either working on it that are willing to help, or there are people out there that have a solution for you already.
That's great advice. So this was the 28th episode of Apple Finch Pudding. I want to thank Arno Libert for the information. Let's meet again for the next episode of Apple Finch Pudding.